Doctor Who recently aired its Bridgerton episode, Rogue, but was it any good? Okay, so this episode is one that I wasn't incredibly excited for, but going into an episode with these low expectations has proven very beneficial to me when it came to the previous episode. However, I was at least looking forward to what looked like a more standard episode of Doctor Who after a lot of experimental or Doctor Light episodes that we've had since Space Babies, and I was interested to see the character of Rogue and his relationship with the Doctor. So Rogue sees the Doctor and Ruby landing at a party in Regency-era England, where they encounter shapeshifting aliens and a mysterious bounty hunter. But was it any good? Okay, so like I just mentioned in the intro of this video, this episode definitely feels like more of a return to the status quo, and it feels like the first standard Doctor Who episode we've had since Space Babies. Every episode since that has been pretty experimental or has been Doctor Light, and I think that's definitely a downside of the shorter episode count, but like I said, this episode is like a return to the status quo, and it feels like it would fit right into the first RTD era in my opinion. We have the main villains of this episode being the Chuldur, who are a fun but fairly standard Doctor Who villain, which once again we've not really had since Space Babies, but they definitely had a much more unique and interesting motivation, with them wanting to cosplay, or more accurately LARP, all across the universe. However, they're not incredibly fleshed out or focused on in this episode, but that's because the focus of this episode isn't really on the Chuldur, it's on the Doctor and Rogue. Okay, so I think the introduction of the character Rogue is done really well. I think I've heard someone else mention it in this way, I can't remember who, but it feels like Rogue is the main character in his own story somewhere, and we're just kind of entering his story. You can kind of imagine him going off already doing these different bounty hunting missions and stuff like that. So I think that really fleshes the character out nicely. There's obviously also the scene in Rogue's spaceship, which I think was really good. It was another fun scene where we learn a lot more about Rogue as a character, and although I liked the moment, I do feel like the Kylie Minogue music, the moment with that goes on for maybe a little bit too long, but I did still enjoy it, like I say. Obviously in this scene as well, we also get the moment with the holograms of the Doctor's previous faces, where we get a look at Richard E. Grant's Schalke Doctor, or what is assumed to be the Schalke Doctor, but it could also be maybe the Curse of Fatal Death Doctor. And for me personally, I don't think this really means anything. I think it is just a fun little Easter egg for people that know about it, which I think is nice, but you know, it could also maybe be hinting at different timelines or parallel universes or something like that, but I personally don't think that's what it's about. Now, I personally think the Doctor and Rogue had really good chemistry, but I can sort of agree with some people who think their relationship was slightly rushed, as it was all in one episode. However, the scene with them connecting in the TARDIS, for me, really helped solidify their relationship. It's also nice to see a scene inside the TARDIS interior in this episode, because we haven't really been inside the TARDIS since the first week with Space Babies and the Devil's Cord, and I feel like that's really been missing this season, which is weird, especially considering how large and especially expensive this TARDIS set must have been. It's a little bit odd that we haven't seen it more because of that. Okay, so Ruby sort of gets a little bit sidelined in this episode in favour of focusing on the Doctor and Rogue, which is a bit unfortunate because we haven't had much of a sense of the Doctor and Ruby's relationship this season, particularly since Boom, besides the fact that they're just having a lot of fun, which makes it feel a little bit out of place when the Doctor calls her his best friend in this episode, although I do personally believe it because we know how long they've been travelling for now. It would have still been nice if we could have seen it more this season. With that being said, I still quite like Ruby's subplot in this episode. The conversations with Ruby and Emily are very good, but they are let down a little bit by the reveal of Emily being a Chuldur. But I think Ruby's subplot also nicely feeds into the end of this episode and fits really well with the ending, even if it does feel like she's sidelined for most of the episode. Okay, so when it comes to the ending of this episode, obviously we get the moment where the Doctor thinks Ruby has been turned into a Chuldur or has been killed and the Chuldur is playing her, which I think was a pretty good reveal that was set up well with the battle mode mention at the start of the episode. And I didn't personally see it coming straight away, but I did start to figure it out and put the pieces together before it was actually revealed to us. But with that being said, I do feel like it was a little bit unfair on the audience, because we saw the shot of them screaming and the lightning coming from the doorway, and we also had the moments where Ruby's neck is cracking, suggesting that she's a Chuldur, which don't really make sense when you find out that she isn't actually a Chuldur, and that she fought off the Chuldur that was pretending to be Emily. I also think the moment with the Doctor wanting the Chuldur to suffer after thinking Ruby was dead was personally very in character. We've seen it before in episodes like Family of Blood and Heaven Sent. However, it doesn't really make much sense as we know he already changed the settings of the Triform before this point, so the fate of the Chuldur was already the same before he thought Ruby was dead anyway. Once again, we have the Doctor crying in this episode, which I think it makes sense for this episode personally, especially when he thinks Ruby is dead. It works less for Rogue because he only just met him, but like I said, I personally buy their chemistry. But I still think this would have been a lot more impactful if he hadn't already cried in every episode so far. For example, if he didn't cry in Space Babies or The Devil's Cord, where I personally don't think it was as needed as the other episodes. I also think this moment would have been a lot more impactful if the flashback moment we had already been in one of the episodes of this season before, instead of being written and filmed just for this moment. For example, if they managed to fit it in the end of Space Babies or The Devil's Cord or Boom or something like that. We obviously have the moment where the Doctor and Rogue kiss, which is very satisfying because it gives us a payoff for their relationship in this episode, but it's also there for Rogue to take the Triform activation device off of the Doctor, so it works both if you did or didn't buy their chemistry or relationship in this episode. We obviously have the moment where Rogue sacrifices himself to swap with Ruby on the Triform, which some people understandably don't like, as surely she could have just come off it some other way if Rogue was just able to shove her off. But personally, I think it's well set up, as we know there's a limit of only 6 people on the Triform, so if an extra person like Rogue goes on there, Ruby would be able to leave as it can only carry 6 people. And then we get the moment at the end of this episode where the Doctor is on about going to save Rogue one day. I know some people aren't happy with this moment, as it seems like the Doctor gives up trying to find Rogue very quickly, with the comments about different dimensions and not knowing his name, but I personally read this moment as him going to save Rogue one day when he finds out how to, especially with him parking Rogue's ship and wearing the ring as a reminder. In conclusion, I think Rogue was a fun episode of Season 1 and a nice return to the status quo, which I think was needed with most of the episodes being more experimental this season and with the shorter episode count not allowing for as many filler episodes. I think it was a very serviceable plot that would fit perfectly into the first RTD era, with fun villains in the Chuldur. However, the villains clearly aren't supposed to be the main focus of this episode, with that being the relationship between the Doctor and Rogue, who I think was a great new character with good chemistry between the pair. For me personally, I think I'm going to rank this at B tier with The Devil's Cord, because although I really liked it, there are still some issues with it, and it is at the end of the day a fairly standard episode of Doctor Who, which I'm happy for because I feel like that was missing from this season. Next episode is the first part of the 2-part finale, which I'm very excited to see what all of it means, and I'm really hoping the second part sticks the landing. So if you want to see my reviews for those final 2 episodes, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to potentially get early access to those reviews, feel free to join the Patreon. I'll have it linked below. And thanks to the Beast Boss for recently joining the Patreon. And if you want to watch all of my Season 1 reviews so far, I'll make sure to have the playlist for them on screen now.